I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the Vietnam Veterans News Podcast. News of interest about Vietnam veterans from a Vietnam veteran. Now, here's your host, Mac Payne.
This is Mac Payne here with episode 1765 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. News about the Vietnam War and the brave veterans who served there, as told to you by yours truly and another Vietnam veteran by the name of John Shoemaker. In this episode, John is going to be telling you about the battle that he and his platoon fought out at the Cornfield, not far from Cam Duc in Quang Ngai Province. The story he's going to tell you is exciting. I warn you now, you better buckle your seatbelt and get the children out of the room, because the story John is going to tell you is going to be a rush that is beyond belief. There are several outstanding features of this story. John's going to tell us about combat out in the cornfield. Number one of his squad leaders by the name of Sergeant Doug Hampton received the Silver Star for his actions in this battle at the cornfield. Another outstanding thing about this story is it's not like your typical Vietnam War story. John and his platoon won the day. They attacked the NVA and they won. He did not suffer one casualty on his side. It's an amazing and inspiring story. I advise you to sit back, relax, and listen to what John has to say, because it will definitely entertain, inspire, and help you realize even more that the Vietnam veteran generation, without a doubt, is as great as any that ever heeded the call of duty from its country. You'll know that after you hear John's story. Without any further ado, John, you've got the microphone. Go for it.
Well, hello, everyone. I am going to relate a fairly emotional story for me about my experience in Vietnam. I have talked about Cam Duc in my former episodes, which was a major operation that our battalion and other units were doing in the summer of 1970. There were a lot of other activities going on, but on this day, I was told to get my guys saddled up and ready to go. We're going to take a CA, a combat assault, into a cornfield. Now, let me remind you of the location. We're about 7 miles from Laos and at the entrance into South Vietnam of the Ho Chi Minh Trail at an old Green Beret airstrip called Cam Duc. I was informed that intelligence and helicopter sightings found a cornfield in the middle of the jungle, about 3 miles south of the airstrip. So clearly there was the impression that this cornfield was supplying food for the NVA as they came down from the north through Laos and then into South Vietnam. They wanted to insert my platoon to check out the area and understand what was happening. You can only do that on the ground because this cornfield was surrounded by thick vegetation. So again, this is in the mountains a bit south of Cam Duc, and I got my platoon loaded, ready to go. I figured we were going to be out for 3 or 4 days, so we had to take food, extra water, extra ammo. And given we were going to be out that far, we're still within artillery range, but ground-wise, we were not going to be able to get much support. So we really had to prepare for getting in the thick of things. So anyways, the time came, and we loaded up on 3, maybe 4 helicopters. I had about 23 soldiers with me in the 3rd Platoon, Bravo Company, 196th Light Infantry Brigade. I was the 2nd lieutenant at that time in charge. Given the situation, I really didn't have any veteran sergeants. It was from me to a buck sergeant. The most experienced were in country 5, 6, 7 months. I had been in country about 4 months. So, relatively speaking, we were experienced. So when we loaded up, we took off from Cam Duck, and as you're flying over the jungle, you look down and you go, my goodness, this is the real deal. We're going out to a CA, an LZ that you don't know if it's going to be hot or not. And that's always the worry, because you're the most vulnerable when you're coming in for the landing at the LZ, and when you unload, you're pretty much on your own at that point. So as we're coming in, knowing the status of the situation, clearly it was alarming when, as we're coming to the cornfield, all the machine guns, M60s, on the Hueys opened up, and they were just raking the side of the jungle next to the cornfield. Before we got there, 2 helicopters moved ahead, and they were leaving a trail of white smoke, almost like in the movies when you saw a destroyer putting up a smoke screen for the submarines not to see the ships. Well, in this case, the Hueys were putting out a smoke screen on each side of us as we came in with the machine guns blazing. And I'm like, wow, this is going to be a serious situation. I just hope we can get off this helicopter. I don't want to lose anybody on a helicopter for sure. So it was pretty exciting. We finally came in. We hovered real. It seemed like an eternity. As the Huey has to slow down, it kind of hunches backward and then it levels off, and it couldn't land all the way because there were tree stumps and, of course, the corn stalks and whatnot. And so as they got close, we had to jump, even with all our gear, 60, 70, 80 pounds worth of stuff, and hopefully not break a bone, break an ankle or something like that. Anyways, we all got off, and I motioned everybody to move to the east side of this cornfield, and we rushed as fast as we could, and those helicopters, they just came, they dropped, and they got out fast. It was incredible how fast the whole thing happened. Once the helicopters had flown off, it was total silence. I motioned everybody to get down while I get out my binoculars, and I was checking out the area because we were on the edge of this cornfield. So I was looking across the cornfield, north, west, and south. What do I see? Well, I see a hill almost directly opposite us. Now, this cornfield's about, 3 or 4 football fields long and wide. And there's this hill right in the middle. I can't believe my eyes. And I'm just telling you right from memory as I go through this with you. I am standing there in the jungle, and I'm looking through my binoculars, and I see what we termed at the time little people walking around. I'm saying there's lots of little people on this hill. I mean, this is crazy. So I get on the radio. Bob Dunphy was my RTO, and I grabbed that radio, and I called back to the Major, Major O'Connor. And I said, Major, and Foxtrot Oscar was the observer, the forward observer who was with the Major. And I explained that, look, I'm looking across this after we just landed, and I see a bunch of little people. Silence. And then confirming, no little people. Attack. I say again, attack. I am like, oh my God. I can see 10, maybe 15 of these guys. I've got 23, and that's only what I can see in the hill. I don't know if there's, 50 or so in the hill behind it, in the jungle or whatever. So I call back saying, I can see at least 10, maybe 15 walking around. In fact, there's several leaning against a tree, and they were like looking all over to see what was going on, because obviously they heard our helicopters come in and leave and shut up the place. And then there's several others that are sitting down with their head in their hands, like they're all disappointed that they missed the opportunity to shoot down these helicopters. Well, what all the commotion was about. I explained all of this again. I said, mate, are you sure these aren't ARBANs, Army of South Vietnam, ARBAN soldiers, that they're friendlies? The Major calls back and says, negative, attack. They are not ARBANs. So I immediately then called for artillery, the 155s that were at Camp Duck, and I arranged for first HE rounds, 155 HE rounds. They're pretty significant. When the first round hit as a marker, I corrected, right 150, drop 100, repeat. So they sent a battery 6 rounds into the hill area, and it was doing fairly well. But then I get a call saying, we got Cobras ready to roll. We're going to pull off on the artillery if you're okay. I said, yeah, sure. Bring in the whirlybirds. Let's rake this hill. I don't want to have to attack this hill right now based on what I see. Next thing I know, I get this call sign, November 5-4. This is Charger 80. I was November 5-4. This is Charger 80. These were the Firebirds. I've got a full load, and my pump gun is ready, and he's ready to rock and roll. Here it is, 2 Cobra gunships. They come, zeroing in, and they're blasting with their mini guns, and they've got cannon. They are just pounding this area. They make 2 runs, and then they call me back and said, November 5-4, they're empty. They're almost gone. So they've used up all their ammunition. I also had to, make sure that we couldn't pop smoke so that they know exactly our location, because then the Vietnam Army would know that. So we used colored panels so that we could identify our locations. In any event, they flew right over us, and basically that was it. I got the platoon up, and as they were leaving, I moved the platoon further south along the edge of the cornfield around the north end, around the south end, rather. And then as we positioned at the bottom of the hill, I lined up one squad to go on the right flank and another on the left flank, and then we would approach it in parallel. As we got closer to the top, we broke into more of a line, and then all hell broke loose. And I could still feel and hear the AK-47s. The type of noise they make is so unique. It's hard to describe it. But anyways, at the same time, we open up, and it's just like in the movies. It's just ridiculous. Everybody's firing. There's all kinds of noise. There's yelling going on, screaming on both sides. Finally, one of my sergeants, I'll never forget this guy, his name was Hampton, Doug Hampton. He says, LT, they're right here. They're right there. There's a foxhole. So I yelled to him, throw a goddamn grenade now. So we unloaded grenades, and on top of the firing, it was just incredible. But we continued to be offensive. We aggressively moved forward. We didn't stop except for the explosion of the grenades. And then we got up and we started running again and firing as we're doing it. My radio man, Bob Dunphy, an outstanding man. He later would go on to get 3 Purple Hearts. This guy was tough nuts. Anyways, Hampton charged the foxhole that had a machine gun, a drum-fed Chinese machine gun emplacement. And he charged and he killed 2 of the enemy in the foxhole. The rest of the platoon swept over the top, firing, and jumped over the bodies of the NVA, who apparently were not only killed by us, but also by the Cobra gunships. So once we get across the top, the adrenaline is unbelievable. I had electricity, as I described it, just like firing off between my fingers on my hand. I never felt so much energy in all my life. I'll never feel it again either. I can just tell you that it is a rush that is beyond belief. And I just started screaming at these guys, saying, after all this time of chasing you, we finally got you, shitheads. And all the aggravation you put us through and the men that we've lost, I was just beside myself. Anyways, one of the sergeants came up and tried to calm me down. Lieutenant, take it easy. And then I collected myself a bit. And then first thing I thought of, okay, we got to get a perimeter set up immediately at the counterattack. We jumped into the foxholes that were already dug for us, really just took the bodies out. We rolled them down the hill. There were at least half a dozen. And then there were blood trails everywhere. So clearly they had dragged their soldiers off into the jungle. But we won. We won that part of this battle. And after we secured it, got all the weapons, collected all the documents, And the major came in himself on a loach. He picked up several of the machine guns, including this big machine gun, like a 50 cal with a big drum underneath it. We got some pictures, and he came in, took it all, and he took off, and he validated that what I was telling him was true, that we had a lot of NVA there that were not the Army of South Vietnam, ARVNs. One of the greatest things going is I checked, and nobody on our side, none in my platoon, were even scratched. So this was just unbelievable. It's a combination of artillery, Cobra gunships, and then a ground attack that happened all fairly quickly at the same time and caught them all off guard. In essence, when we came in with the helicopters, we caught them off guard. They weren't ready. They weren't in place, and they missed it. We were able to get into the jungle, and they didn't see us. And then as they're getting fired upon, we make the trip around the cornfield, and we attacked. Well, next thing I know, the major says, okay, you're going to be staying here for a few days now that we know that the enemy's there. In my next episode, I'll tell you about what happened in the following days. But I can tell you that night was not one that anyone slept too well. But it was good to be alive. And so there is the battle at the Cornfield.
What a story, what a story. Thank you, John Shoemaker, for telling us about the battle at the Cornfield over there in Vietnam. It's nice to hear about stories where we flat out win and carry the day. That was so exciting. I appreciate so much that you told us about it, and now I can't wait to hear what happened next out at the Cornfield. And I didn't even know they had cornfields in Vietnam. It is so enlightening listening to the Vietnam Veteran News. Thank you, John, for telling us this story. We all look forward to hearing the next episode where you're going to tell us more about what happened out there at the Cornfield. You are cordially invited to return again soon and often to listen to more coming your way on the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast.
How about that? Ain't that a mess?